We are going to begin a journey of learning how to track the nervous system, and with that, start to integrate tools and practices to listen to and respond to the body, which is ultimately the key in developing trust within. And I believe also letting that bleed over and develop trust in the external world as well. That allows us to cultivate courage and to be able to use discernment so that we can accurately align with our goals and all of our bigger things that we're trying to achieve, whether it's personally, financially, relationship wise, all of the above. It's all related to our nervous system. And what we're going to get into today are common ways that the nervous system shows up with regards to stress and trauma and co regulation. This is really important to understand so that we can create a baseline and then move into how the body heals via nervous system release. This is like the brick that we're going to build the house on. So this isn't the full story, but this is what we need to know to start from square one, right? So, first and foremost, like I said, everything is related to our nervous system. I want you to really understand that the nervous system is always running in the background of our life. It's not something that we can calm down and regulate and forget about. That's not its purpose. It's there to keep our human body alive and breathing, and therefore it's always going. I know that it's become kind of a buzzword in like spirituality, health, wellness, especially spaces where everything is, we got to get regulated. You got to get regulated. And that's true. That's true. We do want to work from a place of regulation, but I do think dysregulation and versus regulation, living in kind of the black and white world, is a little bit of a myth. I also just want to mention that the nervous system is very complex. And so I'm not going to nerd out on all of that. I'm just going to drop the basics that you need to know for the purposes of tracking and the exercises that we're going to do, and especially reclaiming energetic authority so that you can open into this space of trust. And if you have any more questions when you start to go around this, feel free to talk to me about that. We can go in more depth, but it's not something that's necessary for the purposes of where we're going. So when we talk about things like moving from the shadow to the gift, or aiming to own your power or access your full authentic self, your highest self, the thing that is standing between you and that goal is fear. And that fear is being generated from what is baked into your nervous system. That would be things like fear of judgment, fear of criticism, fear of shame, fear of not belonging, being cast out, fear of not existing, fear of dying. Our nervous system, based on these fears, is what keeps us small. It keeps us people-pleasing, keeps us stuck, keeps us quiet, all of the above. And if you are not aware of that, it's going to run the show. So like I said, it is always in the background, and it is going to make decisions for you or help inform your behavior and your physiological responses. That's literally its job if you don't have some level of awareness towards it. In empowerment and mindset, and even sometimes nervous system regulation discussions, there's a piece missing. We talk about, changing your thoughts, being the observer of your thoughts, finding calm and peace in the body. Those are all different pieces, but we don't talk so much about how they inform each other. Your thoughts are going to create the story that lines up with the experience in your body. So you can do all the work you want on your mindset, but if you're not also responding to the experience in your body, you're going to continue to respond in the same patterns. Before I move forward, I'm going to keep throwing in these little caveats because I never want to invite in a level of anger or something like that towards our nervous system. Our body's never working against us. What it's doing is it's concerned with keeping you safe and alive, and it works tirelessly to do so. Like, it does a really, really good job of that when we think about it in that way. But it's not concerned about you living your dream. It's not concerned about you living in the fullest expression of yourself, about your fulfillment, about your satisfaction. It doesn't care if you are living in a box in the sewer. If you are alive and you're breathing and you don't have these triggers coming in, that box in the sewer seems pretty great to the nervous system. So It's your soul, it's your bigger self, your spiritual self that's really desiring this level of evolution. It's desiring you, asking you to step into something different. And we need both of those things. We're having a human experience, so we need to have the systems that keep us safe. But what we need to do is to understand and learn to work with both together and how to align them and move forward so that they're both doing jobs collaboratively. Okay, so let's start talking about the nervous system. The nervous system holds your personal trauma, so that includes developmental trauma, childhood trauma, things like that, as well as shock trauma. That's both the big and little t traumas. But outside of just the things that you've experienced in your life, it also holds intergenerational trauma, the trauma of our ancestors. We'll talk about that a little bit in terms of epigenetics, but we'll come back to that. There are many different components of the nervous system. Like I said, we could do hundreds of hours of education, but I'm just going to focus now on nervous system responses as it relates to behavior. Nervous system responses or stress responses are the instinctive collection of natural body responses to perceived danger, threats, trauma. Understanding our tendencies are going to give us clues into how and what practices to use most effectively when we work with our body and we build trust. So when I'm talking through these next five, I'm talking about five responses specifically, I want you to just bring some awareness to them so we can just start figuring out what is your baseline. All right, so the five responses that I'm going to talk about are probably ones that you've heard before, and they are fight, flight, fawn, freeze, and free. We'll start first with fight and flight. These are part of your sympathetic nervous system, the system that plays a role in changing your body chemistry and sounding the alarm in dangerous or stressful situations. So your body's response in a fight or flight situation would be to increase your heart rate, to increase adrenaline, tighten your vision, you get kind of like a tunnel vision, bring more energy and oxygen to your muscles, shift your cognitive focus and your executive functioning. You'll experience changes in pain tolerance or pain perception, things like that. It's liberating or it's mobilizing your systems so that you can get away from or stand up to a threat. Like I said, it's the alarm system in our body and it's preparing us to be able to protect ourselves. So specifically in flight, you would run away and escape. And in fight, you would be in the mode to verbally or physically attack. In some cases, maybe a combination. Like if you're running from danger, you fall down, maybe now we also have to fight. There's nothing wrong with fight or flight. There's nothing wrong with being in a sympathetic state. Actually, we would be in big trouble without this mechanism, right? This is really something that we need to keep us alive. For example, if you're in a car accident, you want those things that I just described to be happening so that you can get yourself out of danger, even if you're hurt, or you can, help a child or a pet or something that's in the car, even if your foot's broken. And actually, we really need to be able to relate to and call in fight energy in our everyday lives as well. So maybe we would use fight energy, a healthy fight energy, to be able to protect a value or a boundary. And this fight energy can also be what we use to generate healthy no's. So if we're somebody who is struggling with boundaries or struggling to say no when we really want to say no, then this healthy fight energy may be subdued in some way. That happens to a lot of us. Healthy aggression is often socialized out of people, especially in families that have a history of codependence or had an authoritarian type style to parenting. You're socialized to damp down this response to stay safe. So where it becomes problematic is when we remain in a prolonged stress response or a prolonged nervous system response. And what a prolonged fight response looks like in life is going to look like anger outbursts, controlling behavior, bullying, narcissism, explosive and unpredictable behavior. This is somebody who walks around with a tight jaw, tight muscles, tight neck, like really kind of tight all the time. Somebody who is walking around in more of a prolonged flight pattern would look like escapism. So escapism showing up in multiple places. Examples of this could be workaholism, overthinking, anxiety, panic, OCD tendencies, difficulty sitting still. So, really kind of like a jittery person, or they're always busy filling their schedule, perfectionism. It can even push into some addictions or eating disorders. What we want to do, learn to do when we are in one of these states is to notice that fight or flight ramping up and to ask yourself, am I actually safe? Am I actually safe? And that can be really hard when we don't have energetic authority, when we can't tell what's ours and what someone else's. So what we can start to do with this type of awareness is start to build energetic authority too. And again, we'll talk about that as we move forward. Okay. That's fight, flight. Those are the basic nervous system responses, and the other two build on that. The third one that I want to talk about is freeze. Freeze is a combination of the flight response and then shutdown. So we call it like flight plus. We've gone past the flight. And this gets activated when your external and actually internal world is perceived as life-threatening. So it doesn't actually have to be a life-threatening situation. There's just a perception of life-threatening. In a freeze response, it would feel like numbness, dissociation, your heart rate and your blood pressure drop. In that dissociative state, you might stop having thoughts or lose the ability to think. Things could get blurry or fuzzy. A lot of times people talk about the freeze response as the playing dead response. When we talk about somebody who has moved into a prolonged freeze response, so somebody who their stress has built up enough that they're living here, that looks like difficulty making decisions, feeling stuck, isolating yourself, just like a general numbness, a depression in life. A lot of these sound like depression symptoms, right? Loss in interest, loss in feeling. What I also want to point out is sometimes a freeze response happens before big emotions or as we're building up to big emotions as a protection against overwhelm. And before, if that's something that happens to you, before you invite in any shame around that, I want to just say we don't choose that. That is something that happens. It's involuntary, it's subconscious. I am certainly somebody who freezes before big emotions or has had a history of that. So for what this looks like, I'll just give you an example from my own life. Maybe you're getting triggered in a relationship situation. Maybe you're talking to a friend or a partner, and you feel like you're not being heard, or even more importantly to me, like they are hearing me, but I don't feel like they get it, or they're trying to get it, or they don't care. What happens to me is I stop being able to think. The words literally stop coming out of my mouth when I do respond. It's like a monotone robot. I can't really feel my body. Everything starts to get kind of like concentrated to here, and that's it. And everything below me, I can't feel. I'm not in my body at all. And I'm just sort of like in this abyss. I don't know where I am anymore. And so if you get into a state like this, or you're living in a prolonged freeze state, the invitation here is a tough one. I think it's a tough one. It's to lean into that numbness. It's to remain in the numbness and stay with it, even though what you want to do is to just not be part of it at all. You don't want to distract. What you want to do is poke your head in and see what the big feeling is underneath, right? Because a lot of times this is something that precludes a big emotion. So a lot of times we miss the opportunity to travel to the other side of numbness. I know that there's often a fear. I hear this a lot. This is also part of my story, that once you open the floodgates, you're not going to be able to control the emotion, or it's not going to stop. It's just going to come rushing through you. That's actually the opposite of the truth, which I know can be hard. When we feel emotions, they're gone. And so you might have had experiences where that's not the truth, and it's because you're not feeling the entirety of the arc of the emotion. A lot of times we will start kind of getting to the middle, maybe to the peak of the emotion, but we never get through the full wave. And so if we don't get through that full wave, we go back to the beginning and it stays in our body. And that's when we feel this same thing come up over and over again. So think about if you've ever been in a situation where you just let yourself cry. You're not trying to not cry. You like let it happen. There is a point where you're just done crying, right? And You don't really think about it. It's just, you're done crying. It's gone. And that is what we want to get to with all emotions. And then we move past it. So when we don't cultivate enough trust to feel these emotions, we never get to the other side and they stay stuck. So there's a big, big opportunity with a freeze response or in a prolonged freeze response. Okay, so now we're going to talk about fawn. And this is the appeasement, people-pleasing type response to a stressor. This is often a response that's based on attachment trauma, so the fear of losing love, the fear of rejection, things like that. And when you're in a fawn response, so you're in fawn energy, you can usually see it in somebody's body language. So this is a slump down. Maybe you'll protect your heart. Some people are hands across their chest or hands across their belly, shoulders down, less eye contact, so looking to the side. Think about a dog in a submissive situation. So their tail's between their legs, their head is down. When we're in a fawn response or in interpersonal relationship where we're calling on the fawn energy, it looks like a lack of boundaries, putting aside your identity. A lot of times codependence starts to come from a long-term fawn response, submissiveness in general, not speaking up for yourself. This manifests really similarly in that prolonged state. So we go to this reaction when our fight and flight reactions aren't safe. So remember a few minutes ago when I was just talking about how healthy fight energy or healthy flight energy can be socialized out of us, or they met with the time you were in more danger. Maybe you stood up for yourself or you stood up for a sibling, but in response to that, you were beat or you were punished in some way. You learn to use a different response. So that fawn energy is often utilized to preserve a relationship, but it's at the cost to us, right? So the invitation in fawn energy is to notice when that appeasement is happening and ask yourself, is this who I am? Is this in alignment with truth, capital T truth? Is this what I'm wanting to do in the moment? And you don't have to change anything in the moment, just noticing, is this really what I want to be doing? Okay, final one before I move on is free. And free is a term you probably haven't heard before. This is actually one that I learned from one of my teachers, Dr. Vela, to use in nervous system tracking specifically. Free is the safe and social response. This is being in the parasympathetic state. This is rest and digest. This is where we want to aim to live. This is the nervous system response that allows for connection. Your executive functioning is fully online. There's room for play. There's room for silliness, restoration, creativity, things like that. So we want to be in free all the time and then potentially be pushed into these other responses quickly and then move out of them. So in interpersonal relationships or prolonged states of free, we are relaxed, we can make eye contact, we can make decisions, our libido is online, we are able to pick up on subtle social cues, we can respond to them appropriately when we do, so we're able to read people's faces, we can start to tap in and recognize more subtle intuition. Those are nervous system responses. I want to shift the topic of discussion just a little bit and talk about the trauma of our ancestors, or specifically epigenetics. So epigenetics is environmental or other factors that control whether or how your genes are expressed outside of changes in your DNA. This is turning on or off genes not related to genetic mutations. These changes happen in response to your environment, but they can also be biologically passed down. So what epigenetics encompasses is collective trauma. So this would be trauma of wars, of natural disasters, of major events, huge things like that changed behavior of your ancestors. An example that people often talk about is the Holocaust. There's been a lot of studies done on the collective trauma passed down through the Holocaust. In addition to collective trauma of big events, we also carry the collective trauma of socialization and oppression. So that would be like the conditioning of patriarchy, the conditioning of capitalism. This could even include religious conditioning over periods of time. And then, of course, this also includes specific events related to your bloodline. So this could be if substance use is carried through many generations, or if you have a family that has quite a bit of experience with domestic violence or interpersonal violence. Okay, so we know that stress and trauma can cause long-lasting physiological changes, and the effects of those changes can be felt in future generations. And we know this through scientific studies. So I'll give you a couple of examples that really prove this idea of intergenerational trauma. There's been a number of human studies that were done on Holocaust survivors and their children, but I think some of the animal studies are really interesting when it comes up to epigenetics because they can look at actual changes in number of neurons and brain areas and things like that. So one of the classic studies was done by this man. His name is Kerry Ressler. He's at Emory, and this was a rat study. And what happened in it is researchers paired a scent. It was like an orangey, cherry, almond type scent with an electrical shock that was unescapable. So, basic conditioning. And the lab rats couldn't escape. They would smell and then be shocked. And so they quickly learned to fear the smell because the smell would come and then they would get shocked. After doing this for a while, they created measurable neuronal changes in their noses. So they had new neurons in their noses as well as new neurons in the smell processing centers in their brain. So they became super, super sensitive to the scent so they could avoid the trauma of being shocked. That's not crazy at all, right? Like I said, that's basic condition. But what is really interesting is those rats' babies and the rats' babies' babies. So multiple generations down the line were also startled by that same smell and had extra neurons in their nose and extra neurons in their scent processing area in the brain related to that scent so that they would be extra sensitive despite never being introduced to their dads. Their dads were the ones that were conditioned previously and never introduced to that fruit scent prior to when they did this experiment. In other words, they inherited an experience that their dad experienced. So while their DNA isn't changed, their genetic code is reading and used and changed and passed down through lines based on our nervous system function and what our nervous system experienced. What this all tells us is that the nervous system is your nervous system as a human, as a baby, is coming in with information about what your ancestors struggled with to give you a better chance of survival. It's an adaptive trait that tells future generations, hey, this happened and you need to be prepared, which is honestly really cool when you think about it. But because our ancestors didn't have time, didn't have space, luxury to heal, our nervous system is loaded, like spring-loaded, ready to go with these fear-based adaptations. We're carrying things from many generations that given the circumstances, if we lived our lives in the exact same way, could protect us, but are not potentially relevant to us now. And we are probably walking around through our day responding to threats that are not relevant or helpful to us at all. They're certainly not relevant to our soul empowerment. They're certainly not relevant to our desires and aligning to our desires. Okay, so that was a big oversimplification of epigenetics so that we can understand the idea of what's being passed down and held in our nervous system. But I do want to just state that epigenetics works both ways. It's dependent on environmental factors and things that you're experiencing. So the good news is you can also reshift the way that those genes are being expressed by the things that you're doing in your everyday life now. So you can heal things that have been passed down. Okay, so with all of that information, what we really need is to get good at tracking our nervous system responses in different situations, in different relationships, so that we can start to notice our triggers. The triggers are going to offer clues to what's conditioned and what is a real threat and where something wants healing and how you can respond to that. A really important question to get used to asking is, what is coming up that wants to be healed? And be really open to listening to the answer beyond your own lived experience, because sometimes it's not going to make sense. Sometimes it's ancestral, sometimes it's not related to you at all, and it will make sense in time. But the openness and really listening to what comes up without the doubt of that doesn't make any sense is going to be key. So, when you learn to track your nervous system and you get curious about what's making you feel unsafe, when you feel some kind of trigger coming up or you feel a nervous system response coming on, you can meet those places that need safety from a place of courage and trust. This also allows you to get good at understanding, am I responding to something that is happening right now? Am I responding to something from my past? Or am I responding to something that is ancestral? One of my teachers once told me that it's an 80-20 split. About 20% of the time in situations, it is a stressor that is happening in the moment. And the other 80 is coming sometime from the past, whether that's developmental or ancestral. And so being able to discern that is going to help you clean up conversations in relationship. It's going to help you get out of reactivity, and help you get clear on understanding your body's signals, your body's wisdom, and using those things to align yourself appropriately to the things that matter and are of value to you. You can be in integrity with your heart because you can hear and you can feel your heart. It's really hard to do that when you can't feel what's coming through your body. So, all in all, you want to get curious about your nervous system responses. It is constantly tracking for safety. Remember, there's always going to be something, it never rests. So, when you start to practice tracking, when you start to practice awareness, every time you check in, you're probably going to notice something, and that's okay. That's what we're looking for. The goal is that you want to get to a place where free is the most common nervous system tone that you notice. And maybe there's a couple of little things pinging at you, but they're not running the show. And to do that, you're really going to have to slow down to track and to respond. And we're going to get really, really good at doing that.